All right, so this is a synopsis of the Texas War for Independence. This can be used to fill out your doodle notes, and we want to make sure we've got this information really as a framework for further investigation into this series of events. So we're going to take a look at years 1835 to 1836, and we'll take a look at what we've got here. So a little background information: 1821. The big piece of this is that Mexico won its independence from Spain. This is the same year that Mexico is looking to really improve on its settlement of areas like Texas. And what we see is the American Stephen Austin starts recruiting American families to settle the Mexican province of Texas. So they're essentially invited in by Mexico in order to settle this area. By 1830, the Americans and the slaves that they're bringing in through the American South start outnumbering the Mexicans in Texas about 3-1, and that number continues to increase over time. So there's a picture of Stephen Austin. We're going to talk about him again in a little bit, but let's continue with our background. So some more information that we need to know is that due to the amount of people that are coming into Mexico, the Mexican government tries to stop immigration of Americans into this area known as Texas. So what ends up happening is the Americans continue to come over, so they're illegally immigrating into Mexico. And in 1834, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he becomes the leader of Mexico, kind of like a military dictator. And then what he's hoping to do is really kind of reel in what's happening in Texas and really tighten his control over Texas. A few different things happen, but what we'll do is we'll talk about in 1836, the Texans, who are led by Sam Houston, they declare themselves independent from Mexico. And this is the result of trying to have some diplomatic talks, but we know that some of the friction that was between the Americans and Mexicans was starting to get worse and worse. So there's a picture of Santa Anna. His counterpart is Sam Houston. And we continue. So some of the battles that took place during this time would be probably the most famous one here from late February into March. We have the Battle of the Alamo. 188 men, including Davy Crockett, died while trying to hold off about 2,000 Mexican soldiers. So we don't really know what the actual number of Mexican soldiers was. Some would say, well, probably closer to 1,800. Others say, well, up to 5,000. And the question that you want to think about, why do you think that there's this discrepancy? Who would have said the number was larger? Which group of people would have said the number is smaller? When talking about this kind of a fabled event that took place here during this time, or I should say famous event. So another important battle we have to remember is the Goliad. This one's at times overshadowed by the Alamo, but very significant nonetheless. So continuing to march, Santa Anna takes his army to this town of Goliad. The Texas forces that were there weren't a lot, but they were there. They surrendered to the Mexican army. Unfortunately, all 350 Texans that were there were executed at the hands of the Mexican army. So these two battles lead us to then kind of the conclusion. And there's one of our guys that was famous at the Battle of Goliad, James W. Fannin. But the battle that kind of ends Texas's war for independence is the battle at San Jacinto River. This is where we hear the cry of "Remember the Alamo!" And this is really that rallying cry that inspires the Texans to overtake the Mexican army. What the Texans do is they essentially surprise Santa Anna and his army that were resting by the San Jacinto River in April of 1836. They capture Santa Anna, overtake the Mexican army, and what they do is basically force Santa Anna to sign a treaty granting Texas its independence. And when he does that, they will grant him his freedom. So for the next 10 years, from 1836 to 1845, Texas essentially is an independent nation. They're not part of the United States. They're not part of Mexico. We call this the Republic of Texas, also nicknamed the Lone Star Republic. In 1845, Texas does become part of the United States. They're entered in as the nation's 28th state. But again, of significance is the fact that they are the 15th slave state. So this is going to have implications moving forward with the balance of power between slave and free states.